What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel for another amazing interview. Today we have the one and only Brady Shearer from Pro Church Tools on the channel. We talk for about 50 minutes about different tactics and tools for church social media, and I just want to invite you to lean in. If you are a comms director, a pastor, or manage the social media at your church or any church, you can learn something from this video. And if you're not part of a church and you're part of a nonprofit, you can still learn something from this video. I always say that church social media rules and nonprofit social media rules intersect at almost every single level. You just change the messaging. So I want to invite you. This is someone who I've been watching his videos for years. He taught me a lot of what I know about communications in general, and I just want to invite you to lean in and for this conversation with myself and Brady Shearer. So check it out right here. All right, Mr. Brady, welcome to the channel.
Great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
So, as we know, you are the leader of multiple things in the church comm space, but can you give me an introduction of just kind of who you are, how you got started, and what you're currently leading?
Yeah, sure thing. So I run an organization called Pro Church Tools. We have a stateside location. We have a location here where I'm located in Canada. And we always say we exist to help churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. So I have my degree in theology and youth ministry. I went to Bible college to be a pastor. Kind of figured out, hey, I don't think I have the relational bandwidth to serve well in this role, but all I ever wanted to do was work with churches. So this was around like 2011. And so I got hired on as the media director at a new church plant in the most northern major metropolis on the continent, Edmonton, Alberta. And I was kind of just had a camera put in my hand by my pastor and said, like, hey, go and make some videos for this church plant. Like, we don't have much going on, and we'd love for you to try your hand at it. And so that was kind of the origin. And as I was learning things, I was going back to Bible college and seeing all my peers who were going to go on to become youth pastors themselves or senior pastors in rural churches. And, this was, again, early 2010s. I was like, man, they're going to be in charge of putting a Facebook account on for their church. Like, maybe I'll just teach what I'm learning, because if I can learn it, anyone can. And that was kind of the starting point for the company. And ever since then, we have a lot of different products now, from software to services to certification programs. But at the heart of what we do is just teaching everything that we're learning. And so we've been podcasting for 10 plus years, YouTube channeling for 10 plus years, and then of course publishing content on all the free platforms, which nowadays is social, Instagram and platforms like that. But back in the day, it was blogs. That was how, I got my start, publishing articles on platforms like prochurchtools.com. So that's a bit of a overview of where we've come from and where we are now.
I'm pretty sure I either subconsciously or accidentally took something that I say all the time from you. I've heard you say that a bunch of times. You're helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I always say social media is the new Times Square. Like back in the day, there were, newspapers that came out, and then we moved on to radio with fireside chats. And that's how everyone got their updates. And then, things slowly moved over to TV, both black and white, then to color. And now we're in this social media era, which is probably the biggest shift ever, because it's the first mass mode of communication where you can actually have a two-way conversation, not just a one-way. Have you seen churches kind of really wholeheartedly embrace that, or have you seen churches be kind of resistant to that in your line of work?
Yeah, it's interesting. At the very beginning, kind of the first 5 to 8 years of running my organization, most of my content, it felt like, was tailored around, hey, this is worth embracing. And lately, most of my conversations surround, hey, the supply is outpacing the demand on social media right now. Everyone has woken up to how remarkably powerful and unprecedented these platforms are. And now we're talking about how to, figure out those challenges. I had a conversation with a church the other day, and we were talking about one of my carousels recently, and it was a carousel I published. It was like, rules for church photographers was the name of the carousel. And this is Instagram only. And within like a week or two, it had 2 million views. And I was saying to this church, I was like, if you had told me in 2010, like, there were 2 million humans on earth that cared about church photography, I would have probably not believed you. Much less like, in one day, you, Brady, will have the ability to like reach that many people who care about this for free, because that's what like Instagram and all of these social platforms afford us. And so in the church context, what we always talk about is the church advantage, which is, hey, you have a senior leader who every single week is in the rhythm of creating content in the form of a sermon, and so much creative and spiritual effort is being put into that process. And so if we can go through an additional process to repurpose that and multiply and amplify its impact, like, I want to do that, because that way the sermon doesn't just get preached once or multiple times if you've got multiple services or campuses, and then, maybe it gets archived somewhere, but we can repurpose it and help people discover that. We always say the wisdom of Scripture is for all people, for all time. And so what's great about that is, hey, you're a church, you're not a real estate agent, lawyer, chef. Like, every single thing in Scripture is relevant for all people, whether they know God or not, because the Bible is so rich in wisdom related to community, loneliness, anxiety, purpose, identity, eternity, but then practical subjects like parenting, marriage, finances. And so there's so much good stuff in there, and social gives us this platform that has never before existed in human history to share it to the ends of the earth for free, which of course is our biblical mandate.
I'm glad you touched on the Reels part. I want to talk about that for a little bit, actually. There's kind of two main questions that I want to dive in when it comes to sermon Reels. First off, I'm a huge proponent of recycling content and making, sermon cuts, both like, 30-second to 1 minute long vertical clips, but also maybe like 5 minute long, like clips from a sermon. I know Elevation does that. Have you noticed sermon Reels getting a little dry is the term? Like, every church is kind of doing it now, and like some of what I've heard with churches kind of being resistant to posting them is that they all just kind of blend together now. They're all just kind of the same type of format, the same thing. So that's the first part of the question. Have you noticed they've been bland, and if so, what's kind of your take on how to overcome that?
Yeah, so I mean, anytime something comes out and is done by like a lot of organizations or groups in a single industry, you're going to lose that novelty factor. And so, around 2023, beginning of 2023-ish, kind of coming out of COVID, there was this like boom of churches creating sermon reels for the first time, because there was this huge swath of churches that now had the capability, because they were recording their services for the very first time. And now that is pretty universally possible in most Western churches. And so if that's the case, what that means is, like, that's going to be the most accessible piece of content to create. And I do think that like one of the reasons that the content does tend to blend together is because it's actually really, really easy to make sermon reels, but it's not especially easy to make really effective ones and really quality ones. It's like, I always talk about the principle of congruency, and really that principle is just, hey, your online presence should be a genuine reflection of your in-person experience. So if we're going to ask ourselves the question, hey, these sermon reels are getting a bit bland, are we not also asking ourselves the question, our in-person sermons are getting bland? And if not, why is one expression being more scrutinized than others? If the wisdom of Scripture is for all people, for all time, if it is evergreen, if it's meant to be compelling for all humans that exist, then why do we feel like it's being presented in ways that are dry? I think that what can happen is we get stuck in like the Christian subculture, and we continue to like see the same things over and over again. And I would ask, and I would say to churches, like, your primary audience for your sermon reels should not be people that go to churches that are not locally relevant to you. That may be where the content is being distributed in some degree. But we always talk about three audiences on social. We talk about your existing congregation. Yes, it's true that you don't have the same access to your followers that you once did on social media, but with every piece of content you release, some portion of your followers will see it. And so that's audience number one. And in terms of like the value of a sermon clip for them, audience retention, and like, not audience retention, information retention is not absolute. It's not like you hear a sermon once and like it's fixed in your memory permanently. And so even if you heard that sermon once, hearing it a second time, there's not going to be any problem with that. If anything, that'll help you retain the message better for longer. The other truth is, and Barna published this over the summer, is that the average church sees attenders attend 2 out of every 5 Sundays, roughly 40% of the time. So repurposing content for your existing followers, for most of the people, they probably didn't even attend church on average in a given week because it's less than half the time, 2 out of 5. So that's like your congregation. That's audience number 1. Audience number 2 is going to be those that are local to your church who are not yet following you. And the nice thing about discovery algorithms today is that there is a local component to their distribution. And so that means that it's realistic that people who are in your community who are not yet connected to your church could stumble upon your sermons. I can't tell you how many times we've worked with a church and they've come to me after, some period of time of working together, and they've said something like, "Oh yeah, I was at like the chiropractors, and like he was like, 'Hey, are you a pastor? Because you've been on my Instagram feed this week.' Or I was picking up the groceries and a person came up to me and said, 'Hey, are you a pastor? Because my wife and I are new to the area. Like, we've seen you on our feed. We were planning on attending your church this weekend.'" Like, that's the cool part about the local component. And then the third audience to consider is the people that will visit your social profiles in the same way that people will visit your website to evaluate your church. Now, this is a largely invisible audience that a lot of people kind of are not considering, but as social media continues to evolve, it's becoming more and more important because in a lot of ways, content equals credibility. In the same way where if you were looking up a church and they didn't have a website and they didn't have a Google My Business profile, you'd be like, that's a bit unusual. If you were looking up a restaurant or a new cafe to visit and they had neither a website nor an Instagram presence, unless they were trying to be one of those like trendy ones, it's like you can only go if you've heard about it and know how to like do the secret knock on the door to get entry. I don't think we should purposely be putting up like and gatekeeping the church in that way. But hey, if that's your model, more power to you. That would hurt credibility. And in the same way, if a person visits your social profile, like they're expecting to see certain types of content. And this gets back to that principle of congruency. If the biggest chunk of in-person services is the sermon, then that should be foundational for social media as well. So if you look at it through the audiences that I care about reaching with sermon reels, and if you think about it from a philosophical standpoint, what should social media for a church look like? Those to me take such precedent over the idea of like, this is stale, because if the idea is that the way we're presenting the scriptures is stale, to me, that has a lot more to do with our presentation than the actual format itself.
I love that. You actually touched on something that I say on this channel all the time, where it's your social media is your new Yelp page. And so I always tell people, so I work with a few churches and I coach a few others. And I always tell them, you have to think of your social media this is a church context, but I'm like, you have to think of your social media as your Yelp page. When you go to a new restaurant, you will never go without looking at Yelp and seeing photos, seeing the menu, seeing reviews. It's essentially the same thing. People will social proof you. They'll go to it used to be they go directly to your website and check you out, maybe watch a sermon. Now the front door is almost always Instagram. Sometimes Facebook, depending on the age of the person. They check out your social, then they'll go to your website and maybe watch a sermon. But a lot of the times people don't even watch a full sermon before visiting now. They just watch clips and they see your vibe, your style, and they check you out. So it's interesting that you touched on that because it's so very true. One more question about sermon reels is there's a lot of tools out there that are basically AI sermon reel makers. So you have Opus Clip, you have Church Tech, and a few others. And then you have, the churches that, will edit them internally, with Premiere, with Final Cut, whatever. And then there are services, I'm not actually sure what the service you offer does, but there are services where they have editors inside where they're actually watching the sermon and editing them manually. But what's your take on human edits on a sermon reel versus like an AI edit?
Yeah, so I tried to, gloss over this earlier by mentioning like, hey, I think it's really easy to make sermon reels, but doing it well is a lot more challenging. Because I've been asked directly, I'm happy to respond. So I run an agency called socialsermons.com. Over there, we work with about 200-ish churches creating social media content for them every single week from their sermons. And the bulk of every plan, the foundation of every plan is those sermon reels. So when we start working with a church, what I always tell them is we're going to have an editor on your church's account. It's the same person every week. And their first and most important responsibility at the start of the week is to watch through your sermon. We never use any bots or AI in the review. We think if we're going to make the best social content possible for you, we need to know your church's DNA, your heartbeat, your communication style, and that's only something that can be earned. It's like equity that can be earned from watching the sermon every single week. So every summer, what we do is, for the last 3 years, since we launched Social Sermons in January of 2023, so this will be 3 full years at the end of 25, every summer we've done a test project where we've used all of those tools that you just mentioned to see, could we offer a cheaper alternative for churches that cannot afford our prices? Because our prices, while highly competitive in the landscape of agencies overall, everything in church just needs to be that much more affordable. It's a lot cheaper to sign up for, a $19 per month AI tool, let's say. And so a lot of things with AI we know come down to prompting. So my theory was, if we could get really good at the prompting, because we're doing so many churches per week, then we could offer a service where we use an AI tool and then you mark it up a bit because you have the person doing it, and then we deliver the content. And 3 years in a row, we have done the tests, and 3 years in a row, and we did a whole podcast on this, I have been just very disappointed with the outputs of these AI tools. There were, just simple things like pastors being out of frame or clips that ended mid-sentence, which to me is like some of the most basic stuff. And then what I was having to do was like go in and fix some of that really simple stuff. Like, okay, like this sentence did not end, so I'm going to have to like manually drag the timeline to extend it. And now I'm paying for a proprietary tool. I could have just extended a clip myself using like Premiere or Resolve, a free video editing platform for churches. Highly recommend DaVinci Resolve. So now I'm paying for a proprietary tool that's single use, that can't even do some of the fundamentals and basics. That's not even to mention, okay, are we choosing clips that are like relevant, that are potent, and then are we presenting them in ways that are going to be attention grabbing? The reality is that 80% of a social media post's success is going to come down to its hook. So when we create sermon reels, we'll inject a 3-second hook at the beginning that contextualizes that sermon, first and foremost, for someone that will never see the other 30 plus minutes, but also with the objective of getting them to stop scrolling and give us their attention. So we might, title a sermon like, the 2 words you should never say to your kids as a parent. And the entire point of that sermon reel is the wisdom of Scripture, but it's presented in a way that it hits what we call the intersecting point of faith and culture. So it's broadly accessible to people that, again, know God, but also those that have no experience with Christianity whatsoever. And the sermon reel AI platforms, to me, have not gotten to a point where they can do that. And so if I know that 80% of a social media post success comes down to its hook, and these AI tools are not capable at crafting compelling hooks, and then they're still running into just the basic issues of, mid-sentence ending, bad reframing, and then it's an additional cost for a single-use tool that I can't really use for any other purpose. Like, again, we were disappointed. Take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I have a conflict of interest here. That being said, if we were able to use one of these tools and partner with them, and I do know some of the people that run these platforms, they're good people. They're, and maybe in another year or two, we'll be singing a different tune. But to this point, 3 years in, it's like either do it yourself, don't do it at all. Use a real creative to do it. Like the AI services, I think, if anything, they're contributing the most to kind of the staleness and like just the glut of sermon reels that exist that just really kind of lack that punch that ideally they would all have.
It's so interesting. One thing I've been noticing is almost like bot accounts on like TikTok or Instagram will take super popular churches. 2819 is a great example. This happens all the time with them. And they'll use, AI tools to kind of chop up their sermons, and they'll just post it on their own account. And it's such an interesting thing because it's almost like, free promotion, I guess, for the church. But the clips are always edited so poorly, in my opinion, at least, that it's like, I don't know if it's representing that, because like, your average person just scrolling won't know that it's not an official video from the church. And so it's a really interesting predicament we've gotten in. And also you mentioned you have a conflict of interest. I would say one, like noble of you to, say that, but because you've actually tried to offer like an AI service and you just weren't happy with it and just didn't offer it. I think that makes your point completely valid to anyone watching. But I do something similar. I tried really hard to work with Opus Clip for a while. for a church that I was a part of, a church plant that I was a part of a few years ago. And I did not like the quality. Like, it compressed the video quality itself. That's one. But I also didn't like how, like, what clips it was choosing. So then I started using it for like ideas of like, oh, that's an interesting idea for like a clip. But then I always came up with better ideas anyway, myself sitting through the sermon. I'm like, yeah, actually, this would make a better one. So I'm fully on board with the AI versus in person and all of that. And so what is kind of the state of church creatives? That's a super broad question. So let me narrow it down a little bit. When you started, you were, handed a camera and saying like, hey, here's a camera, figure it out. Nowadays, there's a lot of like official, social media manager, creative director positions. I work with a lot of small churches. And so if a small church was going to bring on a creative, maybe their staff is lead pastor, worship director, maybe an admin who helps out with some of the stuff. And then this was going to be like their fourth hire. What would you prioritize in a small church setting like that? As like their fourth hire?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would probably do a hybrid role of like creative and comms put together. Now, admittedly, that is like a challenging role to fill because the type of personality that vibes with creative is not always the best personality for comms, and vice versa, because one is very like strategic and organization based, and the other is creative, which is by nature a little bit like more abstract and less like tied down. I like to think of myself as like a pretty good blend of creative and like organized individual. I find just as much fulfillment in my morning writing sessions as I do like in my afternoon like spreadsheet organizing. And so I think like there's a lot of value when you can do both. I mean, some of our best employees, we have a team of about 30, like some of our best employees are the ones that exhibit like both of those traits. And then for those that have like just like one side or the other, that's fine. You just kind of slot them in as needed. But comms and creative naturally tend to go together. So like you'll have someone in a church like myself who has like demonstrated some skills like with a camera, or maybe someone's like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good in Canva, or yeah, I have a Photoshop, edited some videos for my school, whatever it might be. And then we kind of put them in that place. They're volunteering, they're part-time, whatever it might be. And then naturally it's like, oh, also like, you need to do announcements and we need to promote on social media. And so you very quickly kind of get into comms. And I would say the number one issue that we see right now is just a lack of like policy or strategy around communications as a whole. Everyone in church, like we want to accomplish the same thing. We want everyone to be aware of what's going on. We want everyone to be interested in what's going on. We want everyone to be getting involved in what's going on. And to do that effectively in churches of all sizes requires like a lot of planning and policy and structure. When that structure exists, when that scaffolding exists, I did a exercise in our certification program the other day where I took my church's events for October, November, and December. There was 490 something events in those 3 months. And I went through the exercise of how are we going to promote all of these? And I did it in this massive spreadsheet that we have. When the scaffolding exists and the structure exists, it's not that challenging. But for the average church, you might have, 50 events in a year, let's say. Who knows what it might be? But like planning them, it's like, I don't know, we have a stage announcement. Okay, everyone gets a stage announcement. And now our announcements, as almost every church has experienced firsthand, are just like the worst part of service. Everyone hates them. The person delivering them hates them. The church hates them. The leadership hates them. Nobody's happy about them. They're not working. Like that's just one symptom of, I guess, the overall affliction that I'm describing in church.
Man, what a great way to kind of go into this. I think it was you actually, but I've always taken the 50% rule, and now that I'm saying this, I'm pretty sure I heard this from you. Like I said, I've been watching your content for a while, but I always take if it's announced from stage, it has to apply to 50% or more of the church. And I've always used that when, I'm on my churches here. I'm on the comms team. So I'm a part of the meetings where we decide what we're announcing on stage and what's going to social, what's going to an email and everything. So we have all of our internal guidelines, but can you, if that is your rule, can you expand on it a little bit? If it's not, then just kind of gloss past. But Are there any other kind of comms rules like that? Maybe some that apply to social, maybe some that apply to emails or video announcements, whatever. Are there any other things that you can kind of bring up, like little one-liner rules like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that rule, the 50% rule, indeed is one that I came up with because it's one of the easiest ways to essentially like throttle the number of announcements, bottleneck the number of announcements that could be applicable on a Sunday morning. Because what happens? Let's imagine that rule doesn't exist. That means any and everything that could be happening at your church would be worthy of a stage announcement. How long can stage announcements be? Can they be 5 minutes? Can they be 15 minutes? Can they be 35 minutes? At a certain point, every single person listening will say, that is too long. Okay, so if there is a certain limit at your church, whether it's the congregation's attention span, whether it's your willingness as a leader or leadership to just put people through that, you have a limit. For most churches, the number of events that they could talk about will naturally exceed that limit. So in my church, we will never have more than like 3 announcements. That's kind of like our thing. The 50% rule is just one of the ways that you can treat everyone equally and say, like, look, this is the policy that we have in place, and it's not about you, it's not about your ministry, because without policy, everything just becomes interpersonal tension. You, the comms director, or the comms team become the gatekeepers for what does and does not get promoted. And now the leader of the women's ministry is like, well, you gave this person an announcement, why not me? And you're like, yeah, that I did do that. And now you're just like in a complete, mess. So the 50% rule is an easy rule. We have a much more like robust system because the 50% rule, like in and of itself, is not perfect. So I'll break it down for you because the 50% rule, like for 500 events, is a little bit too simple on its own. It might work in your context, but we've had to like build upon it and expand it. So in our church, and this will work for churches of all sizes, we have 5 levels of events. Every event falls within one of these 5 levels. Level 1. Most important. It applies to 80% or more of the congregation, or it's a bridge event into the community. So what's 80% or more of the congregation? A service time change would be an example of an announcement within level 1. VBS, Fall Festival, Christmas, Easter, all bridge events, all 80% or more of the church, that's all level 1. Level 1 in our church is allowed a number of different promotional items, including stage announcements. So when we were thinking about we've got 3 stage announcements on a Sunday, we look first to, do we have any level 1 events that need to slot in to those 3 announcements? Level 2 events are our core next steps. So these are not necessarily things that every single person is doing, but these are the most critical next steps in our church that have to do with integration and discipleship. So that would be volunteering, groups, giving, baptism, intro assimilation class. Those are 5. Some churches have 6, some have 7, some have 3. Level 2 also warrants stage announcements, but in terms of like all the different potential promotional channels, it has a little fewer than level 1. Level 3 is next generation, treated uniquely in the context of church, because what we know is that for church vitality, health, and growth, next generation disproportionately affects that in a positive way. You can look at Growing Young by the Fuller Youth Institute. They've done a ton of great research in this. The commonality of like growing churches is that they have these vibrant youth and young adult ministries and kids ministries, because when you have that in your church, it attracts people of all ages, and it's the only age group that does that. So we treat in our church next gen uniquely. Level 3, next gen, kids, youth, young adults. Also allowed a stage announcement. Level 4, now we're out. No more stage announcements for level 4. That's individual individual ministries, groups, or departments. So outreach ministry, women's ministry, prayer ministry. And then level 5 is individual events within those. So if the running group is a level 4 group, the running group meetup at Jake's Cafe on Saturday morning is the event within that group. So level 4 and 5 in our church do not warrant stage announcements. They have a ton. We have playbooks for them. Okay, here's your promotional playbook for level 4, level 5. Here's how you're going to promote. We will equip you into doing this. We will collaborate with you. We want as many people to come to your running group at the cafe as possible, but we're not going to do a stage announcement for it. Here's a simple way of talking about this, and I'll wrap it up. Every year we have Trunk or Treat at my church. It's one of our level 1 events. It's a bridge event. 5,000 people come to this, okay? Your church has something similar. Maybe you have VBS. Maybe 27 kids from the community come to it. Every church has level 1 events. At a level 1 event, let's imagine you could go up to a person who's new. They're on your church's campus for the very first time, and you can make an invitation to them, what would you say? You have two options. I'd love for you to come to church next week. Or, will you volunteer in the women's ministry? You have to choose. Which one would be the most relevant invitation? Well, of course, you would invite them back to church. You're not going to go from, hey, you've stepped on my campus for the very first time. I hope your kid had fun at VBS. Are you ready to volunteer in women's ministry? I don't even know who Jesus is, man. No, I'm not ready to volunteer. That would be a weird invitation to make. In the same way, I don't imagine anyone listening, for the most part, proposed to their spouse on the first date. It happens, maybe in miraculous situations, but for the most part, that's too much too fast. And invitations for church have to be made in the same way. And the paradox of all of this is that if you can do the right invitations at the right time, everything benefits. Because if you can have 5,000 people come to a level 1 event like Trunk or Treat, and if you can, get some percentage of them, let's say 10%, 5% to come to actual church, and then you can get them 10% in there into an assimilation class, and then you can get 5 to 10% of those volunteering in the women's ministry, that's way better than going up to 5,000 people at the wrong time and being like, will you volunteer in women's ministry?
Can you really quickly talk on, you briefly mentioned like a promotion playbook, which is something my church, we don't have. And I actually haven't talked to a lot of churches that have like a promotion playbook. Can you, kind of selfishly, honestly, so I can maybe implement this at my own church, can you just quickly touch on what is in that playbook and what it is?
Yeah, so we have one for level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and 5. And this is part of our certification program. So we give away these playbooks so you can have them in Pro Church Certified, prochurchcertified.com if you want to learn more about that. And the way that it works out is we have like 7 days in a week. And the first thing that you want to do, it's big. This is really novel, Timothy. We have 7 days in our week. This is real groundbreaking stuff. So like what you want to do in your church is you first start by taking inventory of every possible promotional channel you could have. So, okay, we have stage announcements. We have, let's say, the bulletin. We have the welcome desk. We have this social platform, this social platform. We have text. We have email. And you write them all down. And then basically you just plot out, okay, in week 1, what promotional channels would a level 1 event be allowed to access? And you put those all in. In terms of how we like break them out, it's going to be different for each level, but we have different phases. So usually there is the awareness phase, the interest phase, and the urgency phase. So the farther away you are from the event, you're kind of just like building awareness that it exists. You get a little bit closer, now you're building interest to actually attend. And then in the final week, that's always the urgency week. That's when you can like push the limit a bit more with like urgent language, like, hey, this sign up is closing, and that sort of thing to really like drive action at the end. What's remarkable, and I will never get over this, but you'd think I'd learn my lesson by now, is that like most people like make the decision in the final week. And so like it's really tricky to even do these like promotions because let's say our level 1 playbooks for our level 1 events can span 6 to 8 weeks. All the other ones are usually 2 to 4 weeks, but 6 to 8 weeks. So you can plan a level 1 event and be doing like your promotions diligently. And there's a lot of promotion that goes into level 1. And you can be like a week away from it and be like, oh my goodness, like this is going to fail. And then in the final week, like it all like works out because everyone is just like waiting and not making. Here's a policy item that every church can install as well. Awareness is not interest. And this gets back to our Sunday morning announcements. Let's imagine that every human in your church had 100% memory retention, okay? You've got a church full of robots. They will remember every single thing that you say. You could spend 30 minutes going through every single event, its details, its cost, its location, its date, and people would remember everything. But awareness is not interest. Imagine you were watching a movie trailer and all they did was say like, this movie was directed by this person and it was filmed in this location. And the show times for this movie are this time and this time and this time. You would not in any way be interested in seeing that film, though you would know that it exists. What do movie trailers do? They cut together the most exciting parts of the film. They inspire you. And then at the end, they say, find showtimes at this website, or coming this fall, or coming this Christmas, whatever it might be. And so another policy item to consider, inspiration over information. You will never be able to communicate enough information that inspires people to actually attend things. Awareness is not interest. If you always come at it from a storytelling standpoint, you can inspire people, and guess what? People are capable. If you have a singular destination for every next step in your church, everyone knows, oh yeah, if I want to find something, I just go to the website, whatever it might be. They will be able to track down that information once they've been inspired to do so.
What are some current trends that are happening on social that you think churches should hop on?
I think that like candid photos are a really great one. I always say to churches, like, if we're thinking about the principle of congruency on social and we've got sermon content taken care of, that's like the foundation. What would be the other thing that we'd want in there? And the first thing that comes to mind for me is I would want photos of your church's heartbeat and your, what's going on in your church. We call them portrait posts because the emphasis should always be the people in your church, and the people in your church bear the divine likeness of God. And so that's like, the portrait of the divine, portrait posts. And so like the great thing about being a creative in 2025, in 2026, is that the phone camera that you have is so much more capable than the Canon T3i camera I had in 2010 as the media director at my church. And so what's also true is that because these cameras have become like so they're everywhere, is that the aesthetic for photography has changed as well. For my generation, here's an example of this. We had this like stock photo site that was all the rage called Unsplash. It still exists. It's still a useful platform. Unsplash was a stock photography site that was free, but its big thing was that we're not publishing stock photos that have that like glossy, overly manicured, perfect look that you'd find from stock photography in the 2000s. Ours look like movie scenes. There's like a color grade to them. They look cinematic. That was like my generation's word. And it's so funny. I saw a TikTok video a couple of years ago from this woman who was like, "Are you just tired of every stock photo looking fake?" And I was like, "Yeah, don't worry. We came up with a solution for that. It's called Unsplash." And they were like, "You know what I'm talking about? Unsplash. That's not what real life looks like." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And they're like, "We started a new stock photo site where every stock photo looks like it was taken on your phone because that's genuine." And I remember having to like sit with this for a couple of weeks, first and foremost because I had to realize I am now old. But secondly, it revealed to me something that I think I had misunderstood, and that is creative expression is almost always paired with a value, an underlying value. And so you see this in worship music all the time. A certain type of music with a certain type of like rhythm and cadence and beats per minute and instruments is like a generation's kind of sound. And to them, that's like a genuine expression of art for them. And another generation, they'll listen to their music and be like, that's not it at all. And what I realized was the iPhone aesthetic for photography was perceived by Gen Z to be genuine and authentic. And the cinematic photography of the millennials, my generation, was by them perceived as inauthentic and like manicured, which was so ironic because my generation basically came up with that style of photography because we thought that the glossy, like perfect lighting, smiling faces, like whitened teeth version of stock photography was inauthentic and not genuine. And so like different generations are assigning virtue or lack of virtue to art based on their personal preference and their generation's like collective creative identity. And that to me was like, wow, that really speaks volumes. And so in terms of, your original question, like what's the trend? Like just taking photos with your phone, publishing like, the photo dump style carousels or singular photos, those are always going to do a great job of like reminding the saints, like when they're scattered throughout the week, hey, you're a part of something greater. Church family is for you and Sunday is coming. And that's always great. And you don't have to like overthink this. We have a YouTube video called the Church Smartphone Photography Masterclass where I visit a number of real churches in Australia with just my phone and I do entire photo shoots and show, hey, you can create awesome looking photos using just your phone. And if you want to edit them in Lightroom to make them look like millennial cinematic photos like I did, more power to you. If you want to keep them as is and publish them because that's what the smartphone aesthetic looks like and you perceive that as most genuine, great. Stick with that.
I have a run and gun Sony A6600 with it's like a Sony, it's like 20 or 18 to 105, I think, lens on it, f4, just a super standard run and gun camera. And I made a reel with it, kind of, those church hype reels that you see. The next week I made another one, but I got an iPhone 17 and I used that, and my iPhone video looked better than the Sony A6600 videos. And so, it's that is something that's been huge is like, I saw the iPhone photography masterclass you posted. I actually sent it to a couple people who don't use cameras, they just use phones, and I'm like, hey, this is helpful. But yeah, no, it's the phone you have in your pocket for the most part has a camera that is more than good enough to get all this stuff up. So when it comes to posting, this is a question I really wanted to pick your brain on. And you kind of touched on the reel part of it earlier for like sermon reels. But when it comes to posts, there's the whole aspect of discovery of like SEO stuff where it's like you post a certain amount of times. I think you mentioned this at one point where it's like the prime time to post is like 5 times a week or something like that. We always recommend a minimum of 3 times a week. It's because social media will come up in Google when people are searching. So it'll help your SEO. It'll help you stay relevant in the algorithm. But some churches I've worked with and coached, they run into this, well, I don't like this particular thing about the post, so it's better to just not post it at all. So what is your take, and there's probably not even a line, but what's your take on posting content that's good enough to make sure you're staying relevant and you're being consistent versus that perfect post? Because not every post is going to be perfect, but where's that line? Where do you draw the line there?
Well, there's certainly merit to the conversation of quality versus quantity, but I mean, getting back to your story, Tim, about, hey, I shot this like beautiful video using my, my prosumer camera, and then I shot one on the iPhone 17, and like, well, one performed this way and one performed that way. One of our social media policy items is repeat the best, forget the rest, continue to test. And it's pretty simple application. When you have a proven format or a proven subject matter, go back to that well, because people have voted with their time and attention on social and said, yes, we like this. If you're trying something multiple times and it's not working, forget it. And then always leave a bit of space to experiment, because you never know when you'll find a new format that is really compelling to the people that you're trying to reach. Repeat the best, forget the rest, continue to test. To your question, here's the part most people miss. Repeat the best. You are not the arbiter of what is best. The audiences. And what's amazing about social is that people will give you unvarnished feedback on if they liked what you published or not. In polite company, you preach a sermon, you get off stage, no one's going to come up to you and go, you really sucked today. What you hear is, oh, good word, pastor, loved it. That's not true on social. And I'm not talking about mean comments. I'm talking about people voting with their attention and time and basically saying, hey, what you published is relevant to me, or it was not. And so you do not get to be the judge on like if this is quality or not. Now, there are certain things that will not align with your values, but if we're just talking creative things here, then like, no, you got to publish that. And if it bombs, then you're proven right. But you're proven right with like substantive feedback, not you. Because more often than not, what happens is it's just a creative stuck in their head. And that becomes the justification for not publishing. Social media can only be learned by being in the trenches, publishing. The reason I am good at what I do is because I have been publishing content for 15 years and I never stopped. And guess what? Surely the thing that you could think of publishing is leagues better than the first stuff I published. It was atrocious. I promise you. My friend Sean, he always says, your first videos will be your worst videos. Substitute videos for posts, for carousels, for articles, for podcasts, whatever it is. You don't get to skip that. And it's interesting. This wasn't true in my generation because there wasn't a foundation of social media yet, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they really seem to struggle with like coming off as cringe, or like you don't want to look like you're trying and being bad at something. And I totally understand the motivation for that. Again, it's not really something shared by my generation, but I think it can be one of the most damaging and destructive fears that you have within you, because like there is no way of getting over the fact that your first videos will be your worst videos. And so if you're worried about looking cringe, if you're worried about like embarrassing yourself, if you're worried what like your friends, family, or whatever will say because you're trying, like then you never get to see what's on the other side of trying. There's a little movement happening I'm seeing on social. It's like embrace the cringe. And I'm like, yes, good. Gen Z, the younger people, they're pushing back on this idea. They're saying, hey, like it's okay to be cringe. Like not being cringe just means you're too afraid to try, which is not a virtue. That's not like something that should be celebrated. So big point there is that if you're stuck in your head on like, this is just not good, well, social is the best proving ground for that. Guess what? If it bombs, nobody will remember. It'll be gone in 24 hours and not, no big deal. Like if you put on an entire church event and it bombs, like, okay, the consequences of that are a lot bigger. But social media, one of the best things about it, and we haven't touched on this byproduct at all, is that you essentially get free market research for what you're doing. Again, people are voting with their time and attention and saying, like, we like this, we don't like this, this was compelling, this was not, we liked this, but can I raise this objection? Like, repeat the best also means reposting your actual winners. I mentioned that Rules for Church Photographers carousel. I've published that 3 times exactly as is on Instagram. I knew it was going to get good views and good traction because it has gotten good views and traction before. I never knew it was going to be a winner until I continued to test and I tried that hook, Rules for Church Photographers. I didn't think it was that compelling. And yet 3 times, millions of views, it continues to perform well. And so that I can learn from that packaging. I can learn from that, oh, okay, rules for XYZ. How could I repurpose this elsewhere? I got that valuable insight. It's custom and personalized to my audience. Maybe it'll work for yours, maybe it won't. But that's what's great about feedback on social. It's not generic advice that I'm giving on this podcast. It's not like, oh yeah, I've worked with this many churches and it works. It will be 100% personalized to you and your church's creative abilities and skills and your audience and the people that you're trying to reach and your unique location and the moment of time that we're in right now. That is like unprecedented. And again, free byproduct of just being active on social. But you got to hit publish.
I'm going to close up today with 2 little bit more off-topic questions that are a bit more selfish that I just kind of want to know from you. I'll give you both and then we'll answer one at a time. The first one is with the type of content that you post to your company or your personal social media. I've noticed a few different types. There's like talking about trends. There's instructional, so it's like, hey, this is, the type of social trend I've been noticing, and then you have like the photography masterclass type thing, and then there's all the other types. What type of content tends to perform the best for you? And then the second question I have is, you started this, you even mentioned out of college and everything, you kind of started by working at a church and then helping churches. So you started by yourself, and now you have a whole team with you. Can you talk about the journey of scaling your operation? So the first one is like, what type of content works the best for you?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to either demonstration or instruction. So on the demonstration side, that is expressed as like, hey, look at this cool thing this church is doing. And we're basically providing people like access and saying, this is a cool thing. Have you seen this cool thing? Demonstration. And then instruction is anything that takes a complex idea and makes it simple. And I think that's one of my skills in writing. So that will be expressed in like frameworks and formulas and presets and policy that you can like copy and paste. Anything like that like solves a need where it's something that's a bit complex, but now it makes it actionable for someone. Because ideally, instruction should make something that, okay, I have a sticking point here, but now with this instruction, I feel like I can do it. When we were sharing the policy items earlier, you might have a problem of like, there's too many events. What gets an announcement? What doesn't? Okay, the 50% rule, that's instruction. That becomes an unlock for you, and you go, okay, I can install this policy, and now we have like a way forward. Maybe we need to expand upon it the way we did with levels 1 through 5, but if nothing else, this is a good starting point. So those are probably the 2 content formats that excel the most. And then in terms of scaling, yeah, the nice thing is like we've done it gradually over 10 years. So we officially incorporated as a company 2014. We had been like a sole proprietorship for a couple of years before that. Hire our first employee in 2014. That was kind of like the reason why we incorporated, so we could have like an official payroll and everything. My first employee was my college roommate. He was one of the groomsmen at my wedding, one of my best friends. The first 5, 6, 7 people we hired at my company were friends from youth group. So I didn't know anything as a 23-year-old CEO, let's just say director. I did CEO in air quotes for those that are listening. Neither did any of my friends know what it meant to like just be a creative in a company or whatever. So that made it pretty good because we could all just learn together and nobody like had any preconceived notions. It also made things like tremendously messy because we were all just figuring it out as we went. Kind of same thing to getting married young. Like I got married at 21, had baby number 1 at 23. Like it's amazing to build something together. It's also like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I hope I'm not like, hurting you in the process. And so like, if you can get out of it on the other side, like all of our foundational employees, our executives at our company are like friends from youth group. So like we've known each other and been in each other's lives for 20 plus years now. It's amazing. My wife and I, we've been married for 15 years coming up on. Like we have known each other when we were like as broke as you can be, when she was working 2 jobs so that I could like fiddle around with WordPress plugins in my robe. She'd come home from work, headed off to like her other work. And I installed a SEO plugin today, babe. She's like, yeah, great. Okay. Like, I'm actually making money. Like, oh gosh, go back to school. So like, we've been there together. So I always talk about competency, capacity, and like those things have to like grow in time. And like in leadership, you have to be like capable. That's competency. But you also have to be able to like carry more on your shoulders, and that's capacity. And so to me, what I'm most grateful for is like we've never had a season where like we went like viral overnight. Like we've just been slowly growing bit by bit. And so I've been able to kind of scale my competency and scale my capacity along with that. But again, going back to what's mattered the most has been installing policy. The company got to a certain size where like we had to install policy that, everyone became accountable to, because like we were just too many of us. So like, okay, what does it mean to work at Pro Church Tools? What kind of like company do we want to be? Okay, these are the installed values. These are codified. And now when we come across a problem, when we have to make a decision, we measure ourselves against that. And that also means for me, the quote unquote CEO, I'm accountable to those values as well. And so like if you, the employee, are looking at my behavior or my actions, you have just as much of an entitlement to come to me and say, hey, we have this value. You made this decision. Can you talk about this decision in light of that value? And then it's my responsibility to do that. In the same way that like, Church Comms has policy, the 50% rule. Hey, you gave men's ministry a stage announcement, but not women's ministry. Why? Oh, well, that means I broke the policy. Okay, well, you need to be accountable to that. And so we have similar things for, organizational values.
I'm out of questions, but I just want to say, man, thank you so much for being on this. Like I said, I've watched your content for years now, and so it's pretty surreal to have you on my channel. I just want to say thank you so much for being an inspiration, not only to me, but to churches everywhere, in all countries throughout the world. I'm pretty sure the amount of churches you've made an impact on in the world can't even be counted, just either with physically being there helping, or just the content that you put out for free that everyone can learn from. So on behalf of the kingdom, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for helping churches navigate this communication shift. Thank you for all the stuff that you put out. And I just want to say it was an honor to have you on the channel, and I hope to have you back on at some point.
Well, truly, that all means so much. So thank you. Very, very kind of you to say all that.